Watch where you step. There are critters living in the soil that you step on every day, which you've probably never even heard of before. Soil organisms are responsible for biological decomposition, which creates fertile soils for healthy plant growth. They form a complex food web. The food webs are supported by living and dead plants that are eaten by tiny microorganisms, who are eaten by larger invertebrates, followed by larger birds and burrowing mammals like prairie dogs. Some soil organisms are decomposers, like the bacteria and fungi. Others are herbivores, such as some nematodes. The consumers that eat microbes, such as mites, are called microbivores. Other arthropods, like centipedes or some mites, eat these microbivores, so they are predators. Did you notice that different types of nematodes can eat on all three levels? Although there is tremendous diversity among the microscopic organisms, they can be difficult to identify because they are so small. Any tourist with a field guide can identify the animals living in an African savanna, but to identify soil organisms, you need a powerful microscope to view their key characteristics, which can be hard to see. Also, soil organisms are good at hiding, so they are hard to observe or collect. Of course, this makes it difficult to learn about them. What are they all doing down there? Let's meet some of these soil organisms up close. First, let's talk about decomposers. The main groups are bacteria and fungi. When I say fungi, you may think about mushrooms, but most fungi decomposing organic material in the soil don't have a fruiting body like mushrooms do. They are simply nets of branching tubules called hyphae, like you see on this decaying log. Bacteria live absolutely everywhere. We know that there are an estimated 2.5 times 10 to the 29 bacterial cells in soils worldwide. That's 25 plus 28 zeros, a quarter of a million. Nematodes are among the most numerous of multicellular organisms on Earth. They're in soil, water, ice, and some even live inside other animals, including humans. In soils, they tend to inhabit the thin water films and spaces between soil particles. We know that they have diverse functions in the soil community. How can we tell when they are so small and hard to find? One way to figure out their function is to look at their mouth parts. Here you can see that predators that eat other animals have specialized mouth structures compared to plant feeders or omnivores. With a microscope, you can see the fascinating complexity of these structures that allow them to perform a variety of ecological functions. These are tardigrades, or water bears. Tardigrades are an entire phylum. We know very little about them. They can enter a state of suspended animation to survive harsh conditions. They are usually thought to eat algae and other microbes, but they sometimes are predators. They've been seen to eat nematodes. Mites are numerous in soil on all continents of the world. Can you imagine how small these guys are? They average about 300 micrometers long, so an incredibly large mite will look like a tiny black speck. There are mites that eat microbes as well as other invertebrates. These cute guys are called collembola or springtails. Why are they called that? Check out the cool feature. Most species have a furcula for jumping. Do they look like insects to you? They are actually primitive hexapods, which are ancestors of modern insects. These are a little larger than some of the other soil critters. They can get big enough to pick up with tweezers. They can live above and below ground. Can you guess what they eat? They are largely fungal feeders. Think about a food web above ground. This is how we commonly represent the movement of energy through an ecosystem. As one group of organisms eats another, energy follows the arrows. Soil food webs are so much more complex than above-ground ones. Each symbol in this above-ground food web is a species. But a box in this soil food web can represent a whole phylum. There is a lot of diversity at each feeding level. Above ground, we know that if we lose all the wolves, the rabbits may become overpopulated. What if we lose one species of soil organism? Does it matter if the whole phylum eats at the same level in the food web? What if people introduce a new species to the local soil, like when fishermen dump their unused earthworm bait on the ground? The point is that soil ecologists don't know that much about how these species interact, so we don't know how fragile or resilient these food webs are. Now that you have been introduced to some of the main groups of organisms in the soil, let's take a closer look at how they work together in the food web. First, there are the herbivores, for example, root-feeding nematodes. These can be bad pests for gardeners and give soil critters a bad reputation, but they're mostly good for helping the soil community function. Then we have the microbes, like bacteria. When the plant dies or drops dead leaves, they are the first to decompose the litter. They are producing the humus, the surface organic matter, and releasing nutrients. In the next feeding layer of the food web, we have the organisms that eat the decomposer microbes, or microbivores. Microbivores are a huge group, very abundant everywhere. They include springtails, mites, tardigrades, and bacterial-feeding nematodes that you already learned about. Since they eat the decomposers, what effect do you think they have on decomposing leaf litter and forming humus? It might surprise you. Microbivores cause the decomposer populations to reproduce faster, which results in more individual microbes processing more litter into more humus. Also, these microbivores generate their own waste when they eat the decomposers, releasing more of those nutrients into the soil. So you see, in general, the more critters in the soil, the greater the soil fertility. Here are some other groups of microbivores that I bet you've never even heard of before. For some of them, like the Protura, we don't know exactly what they're eating. So what is the next feeding level? Who eats the microbivores? The predators. They regulate the activity of the microbivores, so indirectly they also influence the decomposers and how they process surface organic matter or leaf litter. When you think of predators, what comes to mind? Lions, bears, sharks? I think the predators living in the soil are much scarier, such as this pseudoscorpion. Soil predators are a fascinating and diverse group. Some we already discussed, such as certain species of nematodes and mites. But also some new organisms are predators, such as pseudoscorpions, centipedes, diplurans, as well as spiders. Detritivores indiscriminately eat decaying organic matter called detritus. Soil ecologists call it the peanut butter and cracker strategy. Most people eat the cracker just because the yummy peanut butter is on top. We think that detritivores are eating the leaf litter like a cracker because it holds the nutritious microbes. Finally, there are functional groups often not included in simplified food webs because they're hard to categorize. I call these the things that eat whatever is there, better known as omnivores. Here are some omnivores that I bet you've never heard of before. So how do you think they influence decomposition? In general, we know that all soil organisms are important for decomposition. When soil supports a larger, more diverse soil community, plants usually decompose faster. But as you have heard, they are still very mysterious. There's a lot scientists need to learn about soil organisms. What would you like to study?